Psalm 76 is an advertisement for God. The author, Asaph, wants people to commit their way to God and serve Him. That's his closing appeal to his listeners in verse 11. But his advertisement, if we're honest, seems out of style today. Asaph praises God for being terrifying. He says this in verse 7, "But you are to be feared. Who can stand before you when once your anger is roused?" 3 more times God is praised by Asaph for being scary. Verse 8, verse 11, verse 12. But we might wonder today, is that a good thing? Might we not prefer a God who is instead gentle and lowly? Have we outgrown our interest in a scary God? Well, it's significant that Asaph frames his reflection on the God who is to be feared with the theme of warfare. He says this in verse 3, "God broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war." He says in verse 5 that stout-hearted men of war rose up, but God defeated them. At God's rebuke, he says in verse 6, both rider and horse lay stunned. So, of course, a terrifying God doesn't appeal to those who oppose him. But what other hope is there for the lowly? That's a question suggested by verse 9. What hope is there for the lowly, if not in a God who is strong and worthy of fear? The drama of Scripture begins with a conflict between good and evil and ends with a day of judgment, a day of reckoning, a time for rewarding God's servants who fear his name and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. Revelation 11, verse 18. Psalm 76, verse 9 says this, "God will save all the humble of the earth." How will he do that? Well, by cutting off the spirit of the strong. Verse 12. The humble have no misconceptions about their weakness. They know they're weak. They know their enemies are strong. And so they know they need a strong God, one who is worthy of fear. And Asaph isn't suggesting that God is only great and intimidating. He is also kind and welcoming. The same Jesus whose voice is like the roar of many waters, as Revelation 1:15 puts it, is gentle and lowly of heart. Matthew 11, verse 28. The humble king, as he's described in Matthew 21, verse 5, violently drove out from his father's temple robbers who were oppressing the poor. He could be both humble and violent in just a span of a few verses. So a God who cannot be feared is not worthy of our trust. Fear of God, then, is appropriate biblical shorthand for submissive trust. That's massively true in the Old Testament, all kinds of references to the fear of God, but also in the New Testament, Acts 9, verse 31, Revelation 14, verse 7. Faith is a simple recognition that we are weak, but that God is strong, and that his strength is our salvation. So yes, it is a good thing for those who are humble and lowly, and trusting in God that he is worthy of our fear. Let's listen to how Psalm 76 describes that. To the choir master with stringed instruments, a psalm of Asaph, a song. In Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war. Selah. Glorious are you, more majestic than the mountains full of prey. The stout-hearted were stripped of their spoil. They sank into sleep. All the men of war were unable to use their hands. At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both rider and horse lay stunned. But you are to be feared. Who can stand before you when once your anger is roused? From the heavens you uttered judgment, and earth feared and was still. When God arose to establish judgment, to save all the humble of the earth, Selah. Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. The remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. Make your vows to the Lord your God and perform them. Let all around him bring gifts to him who is to be feared, who cuts off the spirit of princes, who is to be feared by the kings of the earth.